Presently 5:44. Sorry for being late here. We had some difficulties. Start off with, can I get a motion to approve the CIGR meeting agenda?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. There are no speakers or comments tonight. What? No. Okay, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the September 6th, 2022 CIGR committee? I think
So
that's the
moved.
wrong date.
So moved.
I think that's the wrong date. It says,
It should say September 6th.
yeah, September 6th policy of the whole meeting. All in favor?
Oh, we need a second.
Oh, we couldn't get a second? I second.
Oh, you seconded?
Yeah.
All right. Aye.
Aye.
Just for clarification, is President Elliott's camera on?
I can't hear her either.
So before we move on with the agenda, I'd like to welcome Mr. Osage, our parent rep, up here to the dais with us. Thank you for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me, Commissioner Adams. Good to see you again.
All right. Now, at this time, I invite Emmett Stanley, who is the Education Policy Director at the Children's Agenda to present the Solutions Not Suspensions report overview that the Children's Agenda has put together. Would you leave one on? What's Camille's desk?
I was going to ask them. I'll put it in those commissioners.
So put it next to Camille, I guess, I don't know. Yeah. No, I can't hear you.
All right.
Or they same thing,
Hello?
or they
Hello?
different?
All right. Does it work? I'll just project. That would be fine. Oh, is it working good? Okay, great.
Same one? Just put it somewhere.
Yeah. So just wait for them to get the audio working.
Bear with us, we're trying to get the audio working up here. If it ain't one thing, it's two.
Just so you know, Eamon, I can hear you through the headphones just fine, so you're probably audible enough on the live stream, even if the
Yeah.
rest of my
I won't
colleagues
say
can't
anything
hear.
naughty. Don't worry. I'm not trying to. And the two documents you have, so there's the report that I'm going to go over, and then the second document is a summary of poll results that we did. So I'm not going to present about the poll results tonight, but if at a later date you'd like to know more, that's a poll of 600 parents in Monroe County. So it's a scientific poll. We commissioned it, and we asked a number of questions. Specifically, a good number of them were about schools and their views on schools. So if you're interested in more information about that or have any questions, you can reach out after as well. How are we doing with the audio? We all right? Or? Okay. Sorry, not trying to rush you. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. All right. Welcome back, everybody. All right. Today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about a report that the Children's Agenda did. My name is Eamon Scanlon. I'm the Education Policy Director. I know Carmen Torres, my colleague, also presented to you about pre-K funding. And I'm sure we'll be back at some point to talk about more issues because there's a lot of things we need. But today, I want to talk specifically about suspensions and just a little bit of a background about us for those who don't know. So the Children's Agenda, we research and write policy briefs. We also collaborate with parents, community members, and other organizations to build advocacy campaigns. And we secure changes at the local, state, and national level. National, not as much, but occasionally. And some examples are increased state funding for childcare and for pre-K-12 education. So the Solutions Not Suspensions report is about the push out of kids from New York schools and childcare settings. how we can stop it, and why we need to support educators and caregivers in implementing alternatives. The report summarizes current research on why suspensions are harmful and deepen inequities in our society. And the Children's Agenda provides recent data on suspensions in our area, not just our CSD, but the whole county, and other big upstate cities, to demonstrate that suspensions were still widely used when students returned from remote learning last school year. We put forward the Solutions Not Suspensions bill as a way to minimize exclusionary discipline and promote alternatives. And we show through survey data of 124 educators and caregivers in our region that there is some support for eliminating suspensions and promoting alternatives among those educators. And finally, we have scientific polling data of 600 parents in Monroe County, which signals overwhelming support for parents for key components of the Solutions Not Suspensions bill. And of course, you're probably more interested in what city residents thought. They were even more supportive than the county as a whole, and that was in the high 80s. So, we wrote this report in support of the Solutions Not Suspensions campaign. This is a coalition of 20 organizations across New York State. They include youth, parents, legal experts, and policy advocates. And if you want to learn more about the specific language in the bill, you can go to solutionsnotsuspensionsny.org. All right, so exclusionary discipline, and many will know this in the room, it's the removal of a child from a school or childcare setting. And for simplicity, we're going to refer to all of these as suspensions, but they may be in school, out of school, in an alternative placement, and they can last up to an entire year, which we usually think of as expulsion. Suspensions are harmful because dozens of research studies, really going back to the 90s, have shown an association between suspensions and poor outcomes for kids. Some of the things we know that suspensions lower a child's trust and identification with their school. Each day they're suspended is associated with lower academic scores in reading and math. And the really most troubling, children are more likely to be incarcerated in their lifetime, and also to drop out of school and not complete college. So unfortunately, according to some of the most recently available data, exclusionary discipline is extremely common. In the 2015-16 school year, there were a staggering 2.7 million out-of-school suspensions across the entire country and 120,000 expulsions. In 2017-18, there were 2,822 pre-K students that were suspended nationwide. For this report, we requested suspension data from, under the information law, Freedom of Information law, from all school districts in Monroe County, the rest of the Big Four upstate, and select districts in New York City and Long Island. The 15 school districts that replied to our requests showed a total of 15,306 students being suspended at least once last school year, and a total of 134,712 school days missed due to suspensions. Suspensions vary widely among school districts, with some of the highest rates in large urban districts like Rochester and Buffalo, but most suspensions happen between grades 6 and 10, and even pre-K students are sometimes suspended. We found 51 pre-K suspensions in Buffalo last year. 3 of the 15 districts had data for pre-K suspensions. These data are consistent with past research on suspensions in New York State. From 2018, there was a study done by the New York State Equity Coalition that showed these same patterns. And even without a complete picture of every district in New York State, this would indicate that we resumed at high levels last school year with the same disparities we saw before the pandemic. So disparities in school discipline are often the result of individual and institutional biases against certain populations of students. Vague suspension categories like willful defiance or disruptive behavior lead to wide differences in discipline for similar student behavior. Here we see black students were suspended a little less than twice to 6 times as often their white peers across our sample districts last school year. For students with disabilities, the rates were from 1.5 to 5 times higher than general education students. And students with disabilities may act out if their needs are not being met or exhibit disruptive behavior that is completely consistent with their disability and should not be suspended for it. However, supports for students with disabilities are not consistently well funded, and all staff may not be familiar with the child's individualized education plan that explains their needs and disability status. Economically disadvantaged students were 2 to 4.5 times more likely to be suspended than non-economically disadvantaged students. And besides the reasons we've already talked about, students who are dealing with a number of poverty-related stresses at home may need additional social emotional support at school. And these students are more vulnerable to suspensions, just like anyone under a lot of stress is more prone to conflict with others. From birth to 8 years old, a child actually passed through 3 different systems where they could face exclusionary discipline. So I'm here today talking to you about schools, but we want to look at the whole continuum from a kid who's born all the way up to they leave the K-12, pre-K to 12 system. So they may pass through 3 different systems, and that would be childcare, pre-kindergarten, and the K-12 education system. These systems are related, but have different funding mechanisms, regulations, and workforces. And to protect children and support early childhood educators along this continuum will require different approaches and sensitivity to the unique challenges in each setting. So in the Solutions Not Suspensions bill, which I'll talk about in a moment, we push to limit suspensions in cases where there is a clear issue of safety, limit suspensions to cases where there is a clear issue of safety or other legal reasons to remove the child, and offer alternatives in place of suspensions in other scenarios. Some evidence-based alternatives include social emotional learning, positive behavior intervention and supports, or known as PBIS, restorative practices, and a multi-tiered system of supports, which is often under the pyramid model. And RCSD implements all of these to some degree in schools throughout the district. So we're really talking about scaling up models that are often already within buildings. So schools and childcare settings need the funding and flexibility to implement these alternatives and figure out what works best for them. We know these approaches work as some districts, like Rochester, no longer suspend pre-K students using the pyramid model. We also see within districts that some schools have very low suspensions, others very high, showing the importance of school leadership in promoting alternatives. So, the Solutions Not Suspensions bill. There are 6 key components to it. The first would require school code of conducts to include restorative approaches to discipline. Restorative practices, which Rochester is very familiar with, is really about building relationships, getting to the heart of why children are acting out, and having discipline and consequences, but trying not to have exclusionary discipline as that first resort, but really a last resort. And there are ways of mediating conflict, but that's the extreme side of the scale. It's really mostly rooted in relationship building. The second piece is to limit suspensions to really those extreme cases or when there's a legal reason the child needs to be suspended from pre-kindergarten through 3rd grade. And then to shorten the maximum length of a suspension, which now is 180 days, that's an entire school year, for a single incident, to 20 days. It would prohibit suspensions for minor infractions. This was something that RCSD tried to do in 2016 with the revisions to the code to sort of have that discipline matrix and really tamp down on suspensions for those minor incidents. It would require students who are suspended to receive academic instruction. Now, yes, there are currently requirements in state law around receiving 2.5 hours of instruction, but there's no requirement on having a very detailed academic plan. One of this requirements in the law would be an academic plan within 24 hours, and to make sure that there's more guaranteed instruction than just 2.5 hours a day. Finally, this would also apply to charter schools. It's inconsistent in how charter schools, which are also public schools, report their discipline data around their accountability around discipline. So this is to even the playing field. All right. And we hope with your help we can pass this bill in the next legislative session. So we also had some really interesting data we collected in this report. We commissioned a scientific poll, as I talked about earlier, over the summer, and we found overwhelming support for key provisions of the Solutions Not Suspensions bill. 84% countywide, and this is among parents, supported eliminating pre-K to 3rd grade suspensions. And this was high regardless of race, party affiliation, or zip code. It was all in the 80s. It was all very, very high. And we have more detailed in your packet in the Family Voices that gives you some of the breakdowns. And we can share more if you're interested. There was also strong support for alternatives in place of suspensions. Behavioral intervention supports, 87%, counseling, 86%, peer mediation, 82%. There was strong support for limiting suspensions in grades to no more than 20 days. Came in a little bit lower, but is still a strong majority at 64%. So we also surveyed early childhood educators and caregivers. This was 124 for children, serving children from birth to third grade, and 62% supported the Solutions Not Suspensions bill, with only 10% opposed. This was not scientific. It's prone to selection bias in who responded, but it's a pretty robust sample, pretty diverse sample. So it gives us some interesting information to take under advisement. It does show some support among educators for these changes. The sample was skewed towards pre-K teachers and childcare providers, and when asked if they supported similar legislation to Solutions Not Suspensions in childcare settings, the results were more mixed. We saw 39% in support and 26% opposed, which may reflect that there's larger funding and staffing challenges in childcare settings, and there's cause for concerns about implementation when it affects them directly. So more supportive in theory than for things that would hit a little closer to home. But still, overall, surprising levels of support and openness to these changes under the right circumstances, provided there is funding for supports and that we take into consideration child safety and just disruption of the classroom overall. And what was really encouraging is that 96% of those surveyed said they used at least one alternative to suspension in their setting, wherever that was. So based on all of our findings, we have 6 policy recommendations. We want to pass the Solutions Not Suspensions bill in this next state legislative session in 2023. And embedded within that legislation, we want to require implementation of at least one alternative intervention in schools' codes of conduct to exclusionary discipline. And because a lot of this issue is rooted in racism and bias, we want to make sure that schools are implementing New York State's culturally responsive sustaining education framework. We also want to ensure funding and support for professional development to implement these alternatives. We want to adopt parallel legislation that would really address childcare settings, which comes with different conditions and funding constraints. And finally, we just need better transparency around this. We don't have good, consistent data at a state level about the scope of this problem. And I want to commend, I know Rochester has done a lot of work to really dig into this issue, and so there's often much better data than you'll see in a lot of suburban districts. All right, so we said all of this today because we really would love RCSD's support and the commissioner's support for this legislation at the state level. We're making a really big push for this year as part of the Solutions Not Suspensions Coalition. And if you're interested, you can take action individually on our website, thechildrensagenda.org. There's a take action button. We have a petition to the governor supporting this bill. And if any of you really want to get more involved, as help us as we lobby our local delegation or going to Albany, we'd very much support that. Or a signed letter of support would be very helpful. But that's my piece. If you have any questions, or I'm not sure if we have a Q&A portion, but we do. All right, then I'll answer questions.
So, Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you. Eamon, thank you so much for coming in tonight, and I just want to say you have my full support as a commissioner in any way possible, whether that's signing on with a letter or a petition. I really enjoy you always provide us with such a detailed analysis, and your organization has been very helpful helping us decipher information. I think all students benefit from these types of restorative practices and solutions, and this is a proactive opportunity for intervention within our district. So you have my full support, and anything I can do to be supportive, I'm here.
Thank you. I will follow up.
Okay, President Ali.
Thank you. I just, wanted to make sure that what the children's agenda is clear to us about what it is that they are asking, because to his point, this has been an issue that this board has been dealing with since the beginning of my tenure on the board. So, I don't want our community to think that because the children's agenda is now putting this on paper, that this is something that the board has not done. And you did indicate that the board has been involved in this. And so I want to be clear about because there are some sound issues, is it that you're asking for the support for the legislation? And is that the only thing that you're asking? Because if you're asking this board to do something, then I think you need to provide some funding for it. So, and that's what I'm going to start asking people who are coming to us and wanting us to do certain things. Where's the money that you have to include in what it is that you're asking us to do? So I wanted to be clear if this has to do with just you wanting us to support legislation on the state level, and in this, are you asking for the state to provide funding?
Thanks, President Elliott. So this is just to support the state legislation and the Solutions Not Suspensions bill. And again, if you want the specific bill language, solutionsnotsuspensionsny.org actually lists, like if you want to get into the legalese of it, and can give a little bit more information. We've had some back and forth with the bill sponsors about attaching a dollar figure to it. We do want some parallel legislation to have additional funding, but right now this specific bill is not a funding bill. This bill is just about amending the two pieces of state law that cover codes of conduct and suspensions. And right now, districts, there's sort of a legal gray area around whether districts can even implement some of these limits or take things like this away without state intervention and changing of state law. And so that's part of this allows districts to do things that we couldn't ask them to do, right? And I know we'd had conversations before about limiting pre-K to third grade suspensions, and then the legal counsel here at the time said we can't do that, and there was a little bit of a back and forth. So this is something that has to happen at a...
Commissioner Powell.
Just want to let you know I've already completed the advocacy step personally. If you would like for the board to pass a resolution in support of, perhaps you could craft some proposed language, and it could come before the board at some future board meeting.
That's a great idea, Commissioner Powell. We'll definitely get some language to you. Thank you for that.
Commissioner Patterson.
Yes, thank you for your data. It's very interesting and educational. For me, with regard to restorative practices, it's my understanding that at this point in time, it's voluntary. If we're going to pass this legislation or help you support this legislation, I would like to see that restorative practices, which I'm a component of, be mandatory. If we're going to reduce suspension rates and things like that, it should be mandatory that the kids, the youth, our students participate in, restorative practices or restorative justice. So that's just my thought on it. Again, I will look into how we change that policy, but that's what I'm very interested in moving toward. And if you want to speak to that, that's fine too.
Yeah. I thank you for your support for restorative practices, and I think that the difficulty always with really any large-scale program implementation in the district is you also have to win the hearts and minds, and there have been a lot of progress with particular administrators, teachers, and schools throughout the district that really bought into restorative practices, and others that haven't, and that could be true of said of any district, but I know Rochester's really invested a lot more in restorative practices than other districts. And I think there's always a dance between making sure that there's the structures in place and the funding for restorative practices, but not, you can't force a culture change. It's a little delicate. So we really want people to come willingly. But if I had a good answer for how we get there, I'd tell you. But I think it is, like you said, maybe there are things we can do more around the professional development side of this. But again, we want people to be willing, and it's about a culture change. It's not just a policy, it's something people have to really believe in the way that they operate.
Yeah, and also I'd like to see if we have any statistics or data that shows how many disciplinary cases we have and how many kids or students participated in restorative practices to date. So that is, I think it's very important that, you know, we see that data also.
So I don't have that specific data. I'm not sure if the district tracks it or if other districts track it. I think it's definitely something you could look into, and I'd be very curious. But right now there is reporting around suspensions, but it depends on how much districts look into this, because a lot of the information we got was through FOIL requests. And when you do that, if you're not looking at it, you don't have to give it to us. So there has to be something generated. So if that exists, that would be great, but it might be something, and I would defer to the superintendent or the administration. If it exists, you know, we'd love to see it.
Okay. That concludes you. Okay, Mr. Osage.
Thank you.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for your presentation. The one thing, I loved your briefing. It was very informative. I'd be an advocate for this for sure, as a fellow parent living through the effects of missing, you know, a day of school or weeks of school. You mentioned that there was an effort like in 2016, I think, maybe that was a stepping stone to this point here. I would be interested to know, I think it might benefit your effort. You know, are there any, you took a lot of surveys here. Were there similar surveys and things that were taken in back then, 2016, that would show, you know, a progressive shift towards this agenda that you're proposing here? You know, garnered more support, you know, it benefited, you know, grades and those that weren't maybe suspended.
Yes, so there's a couple things. So the first I would point you to, also on our website, thechildrensagenda.org, under our reports, and I can share specifically with you so you don't have to like dig for it. We did a report just before COVID in 2019 that sort of looked back retrospectively at what had happened since 2016 in our CSD. And we interviewed some administrators and teachers and students. We pulled some data just to see how that was working in terms of the implementation of the code of conduct that was revised in 2016. And there's some really interesting data in there around course failures. The big kind of takeaway was suspensions dropped by about a third district-wide, and once the policy was implemented. And then we also saw a corresponding drop in course failures by students who are suspended, and no real change for kids who weren't. So it was, and what happens with suspensions in the research, it's, you know, you fall behind, it's kind of common sense, you're more likely to fail your courses. So there was less of that happening. There was more kids passing their work when we stopped suspending quite as much within our CSD. There was some more anecdotal and some surveying and some talking to, again, parents and administrators, but I don't think, we didn't do something quite as robust as in this report, but I do know the district does school climate surveys, and so that is some data that we could also discuss. But I think you raise a good point. It'd be good to talk more in depth about that. And I also want to commend, I know the district right now has formed a group that's looking at the code of conduct and the implementation of the code of conduct and possible revisions. So I know there are some conversations happening internally about that as well.
Okay, and for me, I'd just like to say ditto to Commissioner Powell's suggestion about bringing a resolution. in reference to this. And so, thank you for your report.
All right.
I think that'll be it.
Everybody.
So we're gonna move on to. So I just got back from, some might call it a conference. I call it a professional development. You know, it was a council of great city schools. I call it a PD. I needed it. I had begun to question my judgment and actions on this board. But after meeting so many like-minded folks from across the country, it empowered me to continue on the path that I have been on. What also was made clear to me, and we're talking about data. This is not my opinion. This is a report out on this at this PD. What also was made clear to me was we don't have the belt. We're not the undisputed champs of most dysfunctional school board in the country. We are not the champs. There's a lot of challengers out there. And that gave me hope. That gave me hope. I have also learned that, and it's important that I report this out because when we're spending money going into these places, and we need to not just check the box, we need to report, did we get something out of it, our money's worth or not? Was it a waste of time? What I also learned was that some folks ain't gonna change their behavior. And I need to just let that go and focus only on the things that affect student outcomes. Another thing, I didn't just meet like-minded people. There was like behavior people. Boards from across this country have them long meetings like we have. They send the administration down rabbit holes. It's one thing to utilize the question log and ask critical questions, but we need to refrain from sending them down those rabbit holes because it's taking up too much of their time. They can't even do the work that they were hired to do. And so we have to use a better judgment on ourselves, on myself. And so I think I'm hoping that from this day forth, that everybody, when they go on they can call it a conference, whatever you call it, or PD, that we do report backs, and so that we can know what was good and what was bad. So that the ones that weren't good, we need to not go to them anymore. And so with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to my president, President Elliott.
Thank you, Chairperson Adams. I just wanted to, just sort of to tag on to your comments. And generally what I do in the past when I'm reporting, I report in writing. This is something that the state monitor has asked us to do. And I think it is appropriate to share the information that we have learned through these conferences because, just to let the public know, we go to these sessions, we're in these sessions. And there is a lot of information that we learned, particularly Commissioner Adams and I participated in the board governance superintendent track. So we were in those sessions, and what came out of that, and I'll be writing this in a report, has to do with metrics. And we had a conversation, we've had some conversation about that the board needs to have metrics, and we have revised our board goals to such that we do have metrics that we're going to be adhering to, so that when we're going into the schools, we need to be saying, going in with those metrics in mind that have been developed by the district from our board goals, and to inquire, how is it going according to the metrics? And that's one of the key things that we've learned from that. And, you know, the other piece is that, you know, it's about, if we just keep in mind, and this is what I've learned from there, that it is about student outcomes. And there's a saying that they put on the board, Commissioner Adams, I don't know if you have that saying, but I'll be putting it in my report. But in terms of adult behavior, it has to align with what we are attempting to achieve around student outcomes. I'll just paraphrase it that way, because that is critical. This is not about adults, it is about student outcomes. And that came in that particular track, that just resonated, that we've got to focus in on student outcomes. Now, the Council of Great City Schools has done some work, and of course, it has done work with our district, but it has not done this work with our board. And that I'm going to be advocating that we look at, you know, how we can bring the Council of Great City Schools in for our board, because there were school districts that presented, and that they started out the way we have started out, and the dysfunction, the way this board has been over the years that I've been on this board. And they've had great results. You know, the dysfunction has minimized, and they focused in on student outcomes. And so you'll hear more of that in my president's report at the next business meeting. But if I could, Commissioner Adams, some of us also attended the Conference of Big Five last week, in the New York State School Board Association conference last week. And that was also a great, Big Five did a great job, as well as the New York State School Board Association. That was the first time that we've been in person since COVID. So it was a matter of you know, reconnecting and hearing what our colleagues, specifically in the Big Five, are you know, doing, as well as hearing from the Chancellor, Chancellor Young and Commissioner Rosa about some of the work that they're doing on the state level. And then there is an issue that the council, the Conference of Big Five may be involved in, and that has to do around sports and the racism that is in the whole sports arena around the state. And there'll be more of that information to come in the near future around that. And there are some other workshops that I attended at the NISBA, but primarily the Conference of Big Five School Districts was where the focus was, and a lot of information that we received from that. And as I said, there'll be more information about the trip in Orlando as well as the trip in Syracuse in my president's report. Thank you, Commissioner Adams.
Okay, thank you for that report out. And I just need to add, the PD that I went to was so motivating for me that I've retracted my decision to not run again. I am running again. That's how much that affected me. So we should definitely put this down as a PD for board members to attend whenever the opportunity comes up, because it really was really effective. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charisma to do a report out on the Family and Community Engagement Forum.
Good evening. So on November 19th, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. at School 12, the Rochester City School District, in collaboration with the Board of Education, will be having its annual Family and Community Engagement Forum. This forum hasn't been in person for, I want to say, since 2019, right before COVID. So this will be the first time this forum is in person. Registration in the Community Resource Fair, which will include various community organizations and some internal RCSD departments will begin at 10:30 a.m. The purpose of this forum is to engage parents, students, and community stakeholders in a discussion on important topics that are currently impacting our district and community. There will be free giveaways. There will be 2 breakout room sessions on various topics. There will be lunch with the commissioners for those interested in having some informal conversations with the commissioners. There will also be some opportunities for our scholars. The first opportunity for our 6th to 12th grade students, there will be 2 sessions. And then there will be an opportunity for any adult attendees who are looking for childcare. There will be childcare young scholar activity for students who are in pre-K and up. So that way it allows the adults to be able to engage in the forum and the younger students be able to do another activity. For more information about this forum, you can visit our website at rcsdk12.org/community forum. And again, the forum is Saturday, November 19th from 11 to 2, and it's open to anyone in our community, especially our students and families in the RCSD. Thank you.
Thank you, Charisma. It just seems like my mic is super sensitive. I feel like I'm trying to not be so loud. So let's talk about the 2023 legislative priorities. I'm going to run through these. We have our legislative priorities, then we also have some suggestions from the Big Five meeting that they had. So I'm just going to go through these really quick. One of ours is social emotional learning priorities, mental health and school climate needs. So we're going to support legislation to increase social emotional learning in schools through social health services, i.e. mental health needs, reimbursement to meet the needs of students created by the COVID-19 pandemic and other critical impacts, restore the proposed reduction in school health services grant funding for RCSD and provide additional funding for health services, and ensure the allocation matches the services provided and include allowances for inflation. Support the continuation of this source as a reliable funding for student health services. Our equity priorities. Support English language learners by providing more funding to support additional bilingual teachers, translators, and support services through an increased weighing under foundation aid and additional targeted support. Support and advocate for the Judge Judith K. Solutions Not Suspension Bill to end reliance on suspensions as a default way to discipline students and establish a framework to instead use proven restorative approaches to inappropriate behaviors and discipline. That was a suggestion from the Big Five. Transportation. Support legislation to provide transportation for pre-K through grade 12 students living 1/2 a mile or more from school due to safety concerns. And with this recommendation, the Big Five put in, provide forgiveness for transportation and building aid filing penalties. The current piecemeal approach is unduly burdensome to the state and school districts. Advocate for the district to be at the front of the line to receive money from the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act for electric school buses and charging infrastructure. That was another from the Big Five. Request a waiver for absenteeism factors to receivership to avoid students being penalized, in schools being penalized, getting thrown into receivership. Secondary students who complete credit recovery classes, essential trips, COVID-19, extenuating circumstances. Right now, there's no extenuating circumstances. they're tagging you for whatever. If you're absent, it don't matter. Community schools, advocate for wraparound services for community schools. Expand beyond criteria to expand the community school model throughout the district. Advocate for awareness to expand STEM programs across the district. Advocate for the state education department oversight for the child nutrition programs to continue instead of the responsibility being shifted to the agriculture markets to avoid any unnecessary confusion and strain for the district. Those last 3 bullets were all part of the Big 5 recommendation. Maintain commitment to the foundation aid phase-in and hold school districts harmless from pandemic-related reductions in expense-based funding. It is urged to ensure the foundation aid formula is transparent, predictable, and captures unique student needs. Okay, that's also Big 5 recommendation. This one is ours. The funding for pre-K due to costs increasing every year. Support an increase to the reimbursement of pre-K services, not only for students with disabilities, but for all pre-K. It is parallel to inflation rates, and the calculation reflects the total number and cost of services needed to educate these students. The Big 5 added onto there says support an increase in funds to expand equity opportunities within the school students, including ELL. Proposal that is supported from legislators. Support the need to bring equitable funding to districts like RCSD, who started to receiving funding for UPK early on and who are currently being paid less than districts that recently started receiving UPK funding. Okay, career and technical education funding, CTE funding. Support an increase in CTE funding for 9th through 12th grade students, i.e. salaries and supplies. Support the immediate increase of city's local share and provide the district sole fiscal independence over city maintenance of effort funds. Support a new payment arrangement that reverts from quarterly to a one-time full payment at a mutually agreeable time. The current dispersal allocations create a negative impact on the district's ability to manage cash flows. Enact legislation mandating MOE annual increases tied to the algorithm that accounts for inflation. So next I have like about 6 or 7 other recommendations from the Big 5, and realistically, we're not going to have all of these on our agenda for the legislation. We're just not. We just don't have this. It's just a few hours breakfast. It's not a week-long conference. It would have to be a week-long for all of these issues. So the board, and we're going to have to get together and prioritize which ones that we're going to actually go with. And I don't believe we need an executive session.
No.
And we're going to have to forego a report out by my vice president. They're not here. So, Commissioner Powell?
Mr. Chair, were you interested in any feedback on your legislative priorities?
Yes, I am.
The only thing that I had kind of a knee-jerk reaction to was the proposal for, now tell me if I'm understanding you correctly, that we receive our city funding in one lump sum? Was that the proposal, or was it that we get state aid in a different stream?
You mean the MOE?
I heard you say, I'm trying to find it on the worksheet here. I heard you say advocacy for a lump sum payment. Did that have to do with our city funding?
So,
I couldn't find it while you were speaking to the topic.
lump sum.
Isn't that what you said?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, it's the top of page, is it page 4? Top of page 4. It says, support the immediate increase in local school aid. I certainly appreciate that. But the next sentence, it says, support a new payment arrangement that reverts from quarterly to one-time full payment at a mutually agreeable time.
Oh, yeah.
The difficulty with that proposal is that the city collects taxes in property taxes in 3 payments. It is front-loaded. The first one is bigger than all the rest, but I can't imagine the city's budging on a payment process that shifts too far away from how they receive the revenues. While there are certainly times of the year when we could benefit from a different payment structure, or particularly front-loaded to before December, right? Because we tend to run out of money close to the end of the calendar year. But I think that the way the payments currently are structured tends to, it seems to me that it's as close to a compromise as we could hope to get, where the revenues the city gets in property tax dollars is more or less managed by the current quarterly payment structure. So I'm not sure just food for thought, if we are going to have a more detailed discussion about this priority list in the future, that would be my input to it, is that we might want to strike that sentence.
Okay, I'm thinking that we probably would be happy to even get it quarterly and just get it anyway, you know. So we might want to strike that from there, and that's why we're here. We're trying to iron out this and get it right. Yeah, and so with that, anybody else got some feedback with Commissioner Patterson?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you. Commissioner Powell, thank you so much for pointing that out, because initially when I looked at that on paper, it sounded like a great idea. Who wouldn't want a lump sum payment in lieu of those other payments? So I support, though, the idea that we have, fiscal independence over those funds, and it gives us more power as a district. So I like that. I would love to support everything in this document, and I know that we can't do that in one sitting. I was really interested in continuing the support for the community schools, especially for wraparound care. I know child care is a huge issue in our district. So if we have to narrow this down, I don't know how many we need to narrow it down to, but I would love to make one of my focal points community schools and just that wraparound service.
Okay. President Elliott.
Thank you. So my concern is, and let me just say I didn't read it carefully, because of some health issues that I'm going through, but in reference to electric buses, those are going to be mandatory. And my concern is the funding that we will need in order to purchase electric buses. And I can't remember exactly when the state is requiring us to do that, but there may need to be some specific legislation around the mandate to have electric buses and what that all entails, you know. So I'd be interested in having further discussion around that, how we craft the our legislative agenda to address that, because that's coming, if I'm not mistaken, that's coming pretty soon. I think around 2025, if I'm not mistaken, but I think that we have to let our legislators know that, you know, what our needs are going to be. And of course, that's going to be a discussion more with the superintendent and with the chief operations officer. But we need to have some legislation around what that looks like and what that's going to mean for the Rochester City School District. Thank you.
All right, before I close out and turn this over to Commissioner Powell, I just like to say, use my personal privilege to say, send condolences to Commissioner Malloy from myself and the rest of the board, and just to say happy birthday to President Elliott.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm 29 today.
Okay. So, and with that, I'm going to motion to close. Do I need a motion to close my committee? Motion to close.
So moved.
So move.
Second by President Elliott. All in favor?
Aye.
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 I'm just going to ask everyone to fill out their survey for the meeting that just ended, and then ask for a 5-minute comfort break so that those of us who need to visit the ladies' room can do so.
Okay.
Beginning of our policy committee meeting of the whole. I'd like to start the meeting with the approval of the agenda. I have a motion from Commissioner Patterson.
Second.
A second from Commissioner Adams. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We have no speakers or comments on file for tonight's meeting, which takes us to agenda item 3. We have minutes for October 4th Policy Committee meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
I heard first from Patterson, only because he's right next to me, and second from Commissioner Malloy. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Do I need to slow down for the voting? Okay. I do see electronic voting is starting to show up, so if you can. The next, item 3B is a review of the NISBA recommendations. There's nothing new. 3C, Code of Conduct Committee. We do have a table in board docs outlining the current makeup of the policy committee, of the Code of Conduct Committee.
Yeah, the only update with the committee is that a chair and a co-chair has been selected. The chair is Madeline Frances, and then the co-chair is actually a 12th grade student, Beatrix Martin. So that's huge that one of the co-chairs is actually one of our RCSD students.
That is huge. Thank you for sharing that with us, Charisma. The next item on the agenda, under new business, is we have a number of new policies that we're ready to move through the committee, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Charisma to talk us through that.
Good evening again. So the policy subcommittee finished reviewing the schools part 1 and part 3. And as a reminder, the roadmap that the policy subcommittee went through was first, the subcommittee reviewed the policies with the district content experts. It was sent off to executive cabinet and any other community input. It came back to subcommittee, and now it's in front of you all today during this committee. We have various contributors from the district, and also including Commissioner Powell, General Counsel, our parent rep. The policy subcommittee met bi-weekly following policy 2410. And at this time, schools part 1, the first policy is the pre-referral intervention strategies in general education prior to a referral for special education, policy 4205. There are major changes in order to update the policy to align with the New York State Education Department and district practices. NESBA has said that this policy is okay. The next one is response to intervention RTI process, policy 4206. There are also major changes in order to update the policy to align with the New York State Education Department and district practices, including an exhibit for minimum requirements of the Rochester City School District's Academic Intervention Services program. And so basically, part of the policy was pulled out to become an exhibit. NESBA said that this policy also was okay. The next policy is School to Work Transition Initiative, policy 4314.2. Major restructure of policy to align with the district's practices, including recommending the policy's name change to School to Career or Post-Secondary Education Transition Initiative. I was going to make clear that that is the full name, is not a either or, because the word or is in it. This policy is also said to be okay by NESBA. The next one is service learning. It is recommended that the policy name basically just add civic engagement in parentheses. And NESBA said that this policy is okay. And then the next policy is instruction of limited English proficient students, policy 4326. Major restructuring of policy to align with the district's practices, including recommending the policy's name change to instruction of multilingual learners and English language learners. NSBA has updated this policy, and so when this policy was reviewed, the NSBA recommendations was also taken into account. The last policy for schools, part 1, is alternative and homebound instruction, policy 4327. No significant changes, 3 separate sentences additions to strengthen the policy. NSBA has recommended that the board may wish to include language regarding the amount of time for students to be taught and address re-entry after prolonged absence, and they did provide a sample. Moving over to schools, part 3, equivalence in instructional staff and materials for policy 4010. This policy is aligned, the policy with NSBA's updated policy and updated references. NSBA has recommended the board may wish to add this statement regarding complaints. The next policy is school calendar, policy 4110. It was agreed with NSBA's recommendation to rescind the policy. The next policy is display of the flag, 4311.1. There were no significant changes, and NSBA did update this policy. The major change with this one was just aligning the holidays with what is currently in our policy based on what NSBA's updates were. And so policies still under review from this policy batch for schools part 3 include pathways to high school success, policy 4090, high school to higher education institutions, policy 4095, and then civic engagement, policy 4311.2. At this time, once the policies move on from this policy committee meeting, it would then go on to the business meeting to follow policy 2410. And so basically the next 3 months, and by January's business meeting, if all is good, the policies would be voted on for them to be amended. Thank you.
Question?
Yeah, just regarding the display of the flag, 4311.1, it said the policy had been updated. What was the update to that policy?
We'll get to it.
Oh, okay.
We're going to
Thank
walk
you.
through each one of these individually. Okay?
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll just remind me when we get there. Charisma walked us through the entire slide presentation, but if we could just go to slide 4 for a moment. To share with you, when NSBA says recommendations is okay, they're basically saying that it meets the requirements of the law for that category. But you see, even as NSBA has said it's okay, we're presenting changes because the practices in this district have changed and we need to bring the policy into alignment. So in case anyone's confused why we would make changes, and NSBA would say it's okay, that's the why there. The only other editorial I would add is on slide number 1 with the roadmap. I love that Rahima developed that visual for us, but I've always thought it was more like a traffic circle because it is an iterative process, and that means sometimes it comes to this committee and we have to go back to the drawing board. So I just want you to all to sort of hold that image in your minds if you should have issues with anything being presented tonight, that it's okay to send it back to subcommittee and work the issue some more, okay? So, as I just said, we are going to walk through each of these individually. The first policy in our agenda to take up is the question of instructional staff materials, 4010. The recommendation again for that, I've gone and closed the PowerPoint. 4010 is part of the schools part 3, equivalence in instructional staff and materials. There are some changes being offered up. Charisma, do you want to show track changes version? Might be a little slow because some of these are in zip files. They have to be unpacked. So you'll see that there are some additions and language replacements. Some of them are because of, simple things like capitalizing district or changing pronouns, which is something we've already agreed to do throughout our whole manual. Are there any questions or thoughts on policy 4010?
Which one are we on?
4010. Oh, you don't have
Right
40?
here. Okay.
Kurzma, you brought up a different, am I taking things out of order? No.
I'm sorry, I started with schools part 1 instead of part 3.
I'm following the agenda, not the presentation.
I got you.
so-
No, that's on me.
So you see, we've stricken most of the first paragraph and replaced it the policy entirely.
Commissioner Powell, is it just
Yes.
that this now aligns with NISBA? Is that what I'm?
But with mostly the changes going from NCLB, Child Left Behind, to the ESSA,
Right, thank you.
okay? If there are no questions on policy 4010, I'll entertain a motion to move it out of committee.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Malloy, and seconded by Commissioner Adams. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Madam President, we don't see you, so we have to have you come on camera to cash.
I am on camera.
Dr. Jallows,
From my perspective, I'm on camera. Can you all see me?
we can now, thank you.
Okay. So did you get my vote?
We did, thank you.
All right, sure.
So online voting is now open. President Elliott, did you need me to take your vote manually, or are you able to do it?
Yeah, you better take it manually.
No problem.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next policy is 4110. This is the school calendar policy. We always vote by resolution on the school calendar, so it does seem that the policy is somewhat redundant. And the administration is recommending that we rescind this particular policy. Is there any quarrel with that? If not, I'll entertain a motion to.
Well, I have a question. Yeah, so why is this district asking us to rescind it?
Well,
I know that
I'll
we
let
do
this-
it anyway, but are we saying we don't need a policy because we do it? But should we have a policy?
Well, if we had a policy, the only thing it would say is that we would vote on a school calendar at a particular, in a particular month of the year, and it doesn't really add meaning.
One of the things that I want us to consider is that we don't have school to begin before Labor Day. Is that something that we need to discuss? I know that one year the board didn't catch it, at least I didn't catch it when I was on the board, that we had a day to start school that was before Labor Day, and then we had to have that holiday where the kids were out of school and then they returned to school. So, that was, in my view, quite impractical. So I'm just sort of offering it up. Is there, is there really, you know, I don't want it to be any confusion about our calendar. And I'm wondering if a policy is needed for that, actually.
I do recall the year that that happened, Commissioner Elliott, you're absolutely right about that, and there was a lot of confusion and resistance as well. But the policy that we have, as written, does not prevent that from happening. It doesn't, it's really silent to the content of a calendar. It just asks that we approve each spring, which is also pretty vague. And it's, in this district, the practice is for our administration to collaborate with other districts in the county in order to make sure that we're making the best use of our transportation with regard to urban, suburban, and other needs such as that. But I don't think we need a policy to have us approve a calendar in the spring. That's just going to happen because we have to approve a calendar sooner or later.
I'm sorry about that. My computer wants to restart itself. So this has happened twice now. So I will forego the conversation at this point. I'm not sure why that's happening.
Okay. Any other input? Charisma, did I already ask for a motion? I haven't asked for a motion. Could I have a motion to advance the recommendation to rescind to the full board?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Patterson, second by Commissioner Malloy. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm going to say no on this one.
Okay.
Online voting is now open.
Commissioner Elliott, I invite you to have conversation directly with the superintendent on that, and hopefully you'll gain a greater comfort level with that. If not, perhaps you'll be able to make the case for us during our policy new business portion of our business meeting agenda. Okay?
Thank you.
So motion passes 4-1 with President Elliott no.
Okay. That takes us to 4D, the pre-referral policy 4205. I think that is in part 1. And this is perhaps one of our most important policies insofar as pre-referral is one of the best ways that we can manage special ed referrals and make sure that RTI is offered before it reaches that point where we have to entertain special ed limitations or services. It's quite a lengthy policy, and perhaps too deep in terms of just the density of these paragraphs to walk through point by point. But if anyone has a particular concern that they want to address, I'm game.
Sorry, which one are we on?
This
right
time
now?
we're on the pre-referral 4205.
Okay.
Okay. As I say, it's a little too dense for us to go into depth if you haven't pre-read the materials. Do I have a motion to advance this to the
So
full-
moved.
Okay, Patterson. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Online voting is now open.
Okay, I don't think you got my vote. Yes,
Was that a yes, Commissioner Elliott? Okay, thank
it
you.
was.
Very good.
Just waiting for one more commissioner. Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, Charisma. This one does have an exhibit attached to it. Exhibits are not, do not require board approval, but this one will follow along. The next policy, the next agenda item is 4F, display of the flag. This is,
I'm sorry, Commissioner.
oh, am I wrong?
The one that you all just voted on, was it 4205?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, the
And
4206 is a policy change and an exhibit. Thank you for calling that out to me. 4206 is also a response to intervention. It sort of goes hand in glove with 4205. Do I have a motion to advance these changes to the full board?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Malloy, second by Commissioner Adams. Discussion?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Online voting is now open. Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Okay, now we're ready for 4F, which is policy 4311.1, display of the flag. I think this is where Commissioner Malloy had a question. Can we first get a motion to advance it to the full board onto the table? Motion. I have a motion from
Second.
Commissioner Patterson, second by Commissioner Malloy. Discussion. Commissioner Malloy, you had a question on this one?
I've actually answered my own question just by looking. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, excellent. I love it when it all comes together.
I couldn't initially find it, but got it.
Okay, thank you. Just because I had a sidebar with the superintendent, I'll let you all know what that conversation was. There are three reasons why a flag, or three occasions where a flag might be lowered to half-mast. One is a national event like Pearl Harbor Day. One is at the directive of the governor. And the third would be a local death of a staff member or student, which would be directed by the superintendent. And my personal pet peeve is when I come to the office and the flag is at half-mast and I have no idea whether someone has recently passed and it's not necessarily announced. It does not require, my suggestion does not require a change to the policy language, but I am asking the superintendent to revisit the regulation such that some communication goes out, whether it's a banner on our website or something that lets people know why the flag is at half-mast. Okay? All right. If there's no further discussion on this point, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Online voting is now open.
Okay.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, Charisma. The next agenda item is 4G. This is policy 4314.4. What we know as the School to Work Transition Initiative, this is one where NISBA was recommending a name change. Is that right, Charisma? Just so that we're all on the same page.
So this is the one that is recommended a name change based on our administration.
I'll entertain a motion to advance this to the full board, including the name change.
So moved.
I've actually heard from Commissioner Patterson first, Commissioner Malloy second. Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor of advancing this to the full board?
Aye.
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 Online voting is now open. Okay, motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, Charisma. Item 4H on the agenda is 4314.3. This also came with a recommended name change. This service learning would be changed to civics, civics what? Civics engagement. Do I have a motion to advance?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Malloy, second by Commissioner Patterson.
Second.
Okay. We lost Commissioner Elliott again? Okay. All right, discussion on 4314.3. No discussion? All in favor of advancing to the full board?
Aye.
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 Online voting is now open. Right, motion passes 4-0 with President Elliott not present.
Thank you. Item 4I, policy 4326, limited English proficient students. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a
Second.
I have a second. Discussion. This has pretty much been overhauled, I guess is the best way to describe the work here. Any discussion? Hearing none, and understanding that there's a lot there, and I'm not binding you to your actions. Once it goes to the full board, we certainly have every opportunity to ask more questions during the first and second readings. All in favor?
Aye.
Online voting is now open. Motion passes 4-0 with President Elliott not present.
Thank you. The last one in this block is 4J, policy 4327, alternative and homebound instruction. Can I have a motion to advance?
So moved.
From Commissioner Malloy,
Second.
seconded by Commissioner Adams. Discussion. This one hasn't had quite the same overhaul that the others have. Say again? President Elliott has returned. President Elliott.
So what I did is just let it roll out to start over, so I don't think I have any problem now.
Okay, you know where we're at? We're at 4320.
I don't.
Okay, we're at policy 4327, alternatives and homebound instruction. There are some.
Are you waiting on the vote from me, or are you still discussing it?
We're in discussion. We do have a motion and a second on the floor. There are very minor changes compared to some of the other policies. It does clearly reiterate the state requirement of a minimum of 2 hours per day. And given the children's agenda, that could potentially be a point of discussion, but that's what the recommendation is at present.
So who's making the recommendation, Commissioner Powell?
This came from the administration.
So a minimum of 2 hours, and this is for home instruction or alternative instruction?
That would be in compliance with state law.
Yeah. Can we, I'd like to discuss having that increase to 4 hours. Because I don't think that there's much impact that one can have, a student can have, if they're only getting 2 hours of instruction. And if they're not back into the classroom, that's going to make them fall behind even more. So I like for there to be more discussion of that. I'm not going to stop it from moving forward, but I'm interested in having that increase to 4 hours. No, I mean, there's just not much impact when you're doing a minimum. And I hear the language around in the policy, a minimum of 2 hours. Unfortunately, the practice is only 2 hours.
Right. I truly appreciate the point that you're making, Commissioner Elliott, and if the vote were to fail, that would send it back to the subcommittee for more attention. So by all means, vote your conscience. And I think that the place for that, particularly given that we're missing some key board members, the time to hear the administration's argument would be to revisit it in subcommittee. So if that's what people would like to do, then the correct response would be to vote no on this. And that will keep it here in committee for further discussion. All right. That being said then, and I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
No?
No.
3-2. Goes back to subcommittee.
Who was the other nay?
Myself. I'm happy to give any policy more time at the committee level if there are, rather than have it, you know, take up business meeting time. Okay? Do we need to do the electronic vote, Charisma?
I took it as you all were talking, so.
Okay, so you took it
Motion
manually.
fails, 3-2.
Thank you. Okay. This takes us to our next block of unfinished business, number 5. We have a number of policies that need to be talked through. The first one, we've put together a very short PowerPoint. As I indicated in our last policy committee meeting, we had our own policy 2000 that was crafted out of language that this board had come up with itself in retreat some 2.5 years ago now. And then we saw the policy 300, which is the NYSBA's, essentially the NYSBA equivalent of this. And at our last policy committee meeting, it was generally agreed that we would try to merge these items as best we could. One way we could do this would be to review the entire policy in retreat, which was the format that we used in the first instance. The other process we could go through is to just work on each line individually. And my hope is that we not try to plow through the entire thing in one sitting, but that we just work on one pairing in this meeting. And particularly since we do have some people absent, I thought we might just like to try our hand at the one that matches most closely with the NYSBA version. You'll notice that we include employment of the superintendent, not just it, whereas the NISBA policy refers directly to evaluation. At the same time, our policy doesn't actually say anything about evaluation. So if folks would like to try their hand at new language here, Charisma's ready to edit the PowerPoint. Are you able to edit the PowerPoint block, Charisma? So my first thought would be the opening portion of the sentence would be to employ and evaluate the superintendent. I don't imagine that's terribly controversial. Are we comfortable with the next phrase? Capable of ensuring that the school personnel carry out all of the policies? Is everyone comfortable with the language that we have used previously? My next thought is to check and see if we have a policy 320. And if so, do we want to insert in accordance with? Yeah, we do. We do have a policy 320, evaluate the superintendent. Do we want to insert that language into our version as well? In other words, it would read, employ and evaluate a superintendent in accordance with policy 320, capable of ensuring the school personnel carry out the policies of the board. Does that make sense to everyone? Let's see, do we have a policy on? There is no policy on hiring, so there's nothing to refer back to there. And of course, we do that differently every time in terms of how we go about the hiring portion. But are there any other thoughts on this particular bullet? Okay. The next one, because we do have people missing tonight, is I'd like to tackle the next pairing next month. If Charisma, you already did. So there are two bullets in the NISBA version that more or less align to ours. And I would just ask folks to cogitate over what we have in our existing policy, what NISBA is recommending, and see if we can't come up with one statement here that covers, that encapsulates everything that NISBA is offering. Could we do our homework between now and next policy committee meeting? If everyone's agreed on that, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the video conferencing policy. This again is one that I'm concerned that we don't have everyone at the table to actually take action on this. We put together a little PowerPoint on this one as well. First and foremost, I think, Adrian, you have a recommendation. Our policy is different from NISBA's, and we do have a recommendation, and the points being made in the PowerPoint flow from that recommendation.
Yeah, so the bottom line is our video conferencing policy is out of date. It needs to be updated to be more in line with the law. The law changed, during the pandemic, and there is a hybrid option. And so the current policy needs to be updated to reflect some of the changes as they exist now.
Okay. What I found in comparing the two was that our policy currently allows board members to request from the board president permission to video conference in at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting. And we were one of the early adopters, so we had a policy before NISBA had a template, and the NISBA policy recommendation calls upon us to provide for a location that is open to the public and appropriate public notices have been given. And this is a little bit at odds with how loose our current policy is. Our current policy basically doesn't speak to the fact that people on video conferencing need to be in a public space. Now, when the law first allowed for video conferencing, an argument was made that someone can conference from their home as long as they're willing to open their door when someone, member of the public, decides they want to watch the meeting from your living room. That's literally the conversation that was had at that time. And I'm not sure we want to walk into that territory. However, the requirement for notice does suggest, number one, that board members need to notify further in advance that they need to video conference in instead of be in person, so that public notice can be given, and that board member needs to declare the location from which they're conferencing so that it can be noticed in the public. And I didn't want that big shift. I didn't want us to simply adopt NISBA's policy in total without being really aware of how that's going to have to change our norms and the way that we, as board members, conduct our business. So, right now, I'm just calling that difference to your attention, and I think I'd like for us to discuss it more full-throatedly at our next policy committee. Go ahead, Commissioner Malloy.
So are we considering adopting language that requires 24-hour notice to the need for video conferencing? I think if that's the case, my only concern would be there are times when we have childcare needs that sort of usurp that. If you get a call to come pick up your kid from school, you can still participate in the meeting, but you're the sole caregiver for a child who's ill, or if a child has COVID or another extenuating illness, and you have to be home with them, but can still participate in the meeting video conferencing wise.
Right.
How does this allow for, if anything?
I'm going to pitch this to Adrian, but currently, our current policy requests, and that's why it's highlighted in the PowerPoint, requests that 24 hours notice be given, in part so we can set up the equipment, right?
Right.
But whether that's sufficient to be in keeping with the open meetings law, that's where I really need to hand the ball to Adrian to answer.
Right, so I encourage the commissioners to read the notes, right? Because this one actually has extensive notes. There are some things in this draft that are, as a result of law, but there's some that are just like recommendations based on, hey, these are best practices. Our current policy essentially says it's strongly recommended that at least 24 hours of advance notice is given. Best practice is to align notice of the meeting with the request for, with the video conferencing. And I think the law doesn't say you have to give 24 hours notice, right? So that is a discussion point for the board. A lot of say you should give 24 hours notice. However, it should be a part of the notice for the meeting. And so, in our district, things are really, the meetings are really finalized, 48 hours, right, or more before. So ideally, that should be the goal. If something is, if commissioners are aware that there's going to be some reason that they're not going to be physically present, then you want to give, that much notice. But I don't think the law sets a hard line. It has to be 24 hours.
Okay.
The other thing I want to clarify again, read through the policy because there's two different type of virtual, things going on, right? One is the kind of hybrid thing that got passed during the pandemic, which is you still need 4 board members present, and you need 4 people physically present with locations open to the public, and then if permission is granted for the other 3 video conferencing, then their locations do not have to be open to the public. However, if you're talking like the full virtual that existed before, right, then the locations have to be open to the public. So there is, if you read through the policy, there's a section 1 that talks about what kind of existed pre-pandemic, and then there is section 2 which talks about the hybrid, which is now reflected in section 103A of the law.
Okay, Commissioner Patterson?
Yeah, for clarity purposes, you used the term "open the door," and I'm just looking for clarification on that term. And I think what our general counsel was saying is that, again, for clarification for me, is if you're going to video conference from home, you have to say you're video conferencing from your residence. Am I correct? Actually, it's a question posed toward both of you.
Right. So I think what Commissioner Powell might have been referencing is the open and accessible element. So again, if we're talking actually, remote meetings where there's not a physical quorum present, right? Then the locations of people, every location has to be open and accessible to the public. In the hybrid, in the section 103A says, if you have 4 members physically present, open and accessible to the public, then for our board quorum, then the remaining members do not have to disclose their locations, and it does not have to be open and accessible to the public. So that's the distinction.
Okay. So if we look at slides 2 and 3, they basically take the problems into 2 parts. One is, how do we want to handle the request part? Do we want? Let me ask a question, Adrian. Suppose that our policy language were to say notice of the need to video conference in should be requested prior to the meeting notice, but with a is it possible to do an amended notice to the public? So if in other words, if somebody learns in the middle of the day of the meeting that they have COVID and they can't physically be here, would we be able to put out a revised notice that includes information about where the video conferencing person is?
I think so. In the open meetings law, there is a notice section, and it kind of lays out that it makes a distinction between the length of time that the board knows that the meeting is coming. So for example, it says if the meeting is scheduled at least 1 week prior, notice should be given 72 hours, at least 72 hours before the meeting, right? It also says the public time and place of every other meeting shall be given to the extent practicable. So it really gives some flexibility if something happens that is, to the extent practicable, right? To, you gotta make best efforts. You should plan to notice the meeting for as much time, in advance as you can. But I think if something happens, there is that little bit of flexibility there to update the notice.
So let me give another hypothetical. This past week, we've had a lot of people at conferences, and some of the conferences were in public spaces. They just didn't happen to be in public spaces in Rochester. If we noticed that, and these are, obviously, we know well in advance if we're attending a conference, would we still be able to meet with less than 4 people physically present if 2 of them were here and 2 of them were in a conference room in Syracuse during the NISBA conference?
I think that would present problems. The Committee on Open Government has issued advisory opinions on that. The problem with that is the people who are remote don't control the access to their location, right? So if someone is, again, and one of the examples in one of the cases is someone was at a restaurant and said, hey, I'm at a restaurant, it's open, but they don't really control the access to that restaurant. So is it really open and accessible to the public? So I think that it would be situation specific, but I don't think that would be prudent planning. And that's not, I don't think that would be prudent planning for the board. I think that would present problems, potentially present problems with the Committee on Open Government.
And I ask those questions because whatever we do, it's going to affect our norms and the way we move forward. Does anyone have any suggestions how Adrian might come up with a hybrid version of the video conferencing based on what we've heard so far?
So for me, I really have an issue with us having on there 24 hours. I'm really concerned with that because it's just, in my life, there's just so much stuff, I don't have no advance notice at all. And having kids and just family members, just being involved in a lot of stuff, I think we need, I would hate to be trapped in that rule like that. That's what I'm saying. I would like to have the flexibility that the administration has when we tell them we need 24 hours notice on bringing resolutions in dates, which I'd like to have that type of wiggle room.
I agree with that.
Yeah. And keep in mind that the request of 24 hours that you see on slide 2 is actually our current policy. That's what we've been on record as a board as saying that's what we were willing to the constraints we were willing to live under. So again, I'm mostly putting out these as essentially the problem statements and asking folks to really brainstorm how they want to come up with solutions that will honor the open meetings law, honor the general municipal laws as they're written, and still allow us to be public figures and private citizens at the same time. Okay?
Yeah.
So we'll call that the end of the discussion for tonight. If anyone has specific language ideas, I urge them to convey those to Charisma or to Adrian directly, because the burden of melding these or taking the best of one is going to be up to him. Okay? All right. I do believe that's the end of our agenda. We do have a meeting survey, and I asked Charisma at the last minute to amend our survey because in the case where our meeting is second in line. There is no fixed start time, so for this particular meeting, when you fill out the survey, if you'll just select the third radial button, which now reads NA, the committee meeting followed behind another committee meeting. And we're going to keep trying to fine-tune this survey until it allows for a meaningful input. Because right now, like, did we meet start time isn't very meaningful when you're the second meeting of the night. So if you could all race through that survey for me. I'm going to be compiling results and as early as tomorrow and report out what this revised survey is telling us. Because I do believe that the questions are more specific and potentially more useful. Yes, ma'am.
So is this a permanent addition to the survey?
Well, every one of our committees, we can tailor our own surveys, and this is the policy committee survey that you see now. And I invite other committee members or committee chairs to tailor their surveys so that they perhaps can bring more meaning to the table.
Commissioner Powell,
Yes, ma'am.
is there a way in which I can do it tomorrow? I'm
Okay.
actually just listening on my phone, and I've got to elevate my leg, and so I'm not on the laptop. So is it possible that I can do it tomorrow?
Sure.
All right.
I'll wait.
Thank you.
I'll wait till the weekend to compile results. Then, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And if folks are done, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
I have a motion from
Second.
Commissioner Patterson and a second from Commissioner Elliott. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you and good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.